first time it will be covered in a positive fashion, as though this is progress. We've been, good, or it's ignored completely. And then you'll have some of those same exact trends at a different period of time. And depending on the conditions, it will be, front headline news every day. Also, the way we talk about crime, for example, we talk about crime as though the only thing to solve it or bring it down is investing in incarceration and policing. When I go to our local hospitals, and I've been in Rikers, I've been in the solitary confinement wing, I've talked to people, and talked to people that were held there, as well as social workers and doctors in hospitals. And the thing that isn't being discussed is that, first of all, there is a huge mental health crisis during and after the pandemic. It is affecting all ages, all demographics. This was a collective traumatic event, but that's secondly, that it is particularly impacting young people in a very acute way. I mean, we are talking about, kids that are being admitted for mental health crises at extremely young ages, as young as 12, 11, being hospitalized. And when you look at where a lot of this crime is coming from, it's coming from boys. And when we cut our school budgets, and there's no after-school programs, and there's no one-on-one counseling, and these kids who are teenagers who just endured 2 years of trauma now are just kind of let out into the street because there's no funding for after-school activity, mentoring, etc., where do you think happens? I mean, but the only thing that goes up, the only funding that goes up is funding to put those little boys in jail. But what funding gets cut? What funding just got announced for cuts? School funding. And so, but we're taught to believe that investing in our schools is like some long-term, holistic approach to crime, that's summer youth employment, etc. This takes like years and years and years to fix, when it can be pretty fast. When violence interruption programs, where we take people in our community, we take people who served time in jail, that did things that they now regret, that rehabilitated themselves, are now some of our most helpful people in mentoring and interrupting violence in our communities, because they find these kids, they find these young men, and because they know what it feels like to be there, they are our communities, formerly incarcerated people, have become one of our community's best tools, best people to bring down violence, by getting into this situation, talking to kids, and really understanding where they're at. But we don't fund violence interruption. We don't fund summer youth employment the way that we need to. We don't fund after school programs. And so then you have a lot of desperate young people that are out and either underemployed, aren't given the attention that they need. And what does that create? Not only that, but especially when we're talking about incidents of violence and shootings, there is no high level of shootings without a high level of guns and gun supply. And we don't want to talk about that as a country. But frankly, as long as there's just kind of this loose, wild gun supply that is completely unregulated, that can be where people's weapons can be trafficked and not traced back to their, to their owner, etc. And I'm not talking about responsible gun owners. If you're a responsible gun owner, that's the standard we're trying to meet as a country. But we are not a country of responsible gun ownership. Like, let's just put it out there like that, because we don't have responsible check systems. Congress, I mean, we can barely pass responsible gun legislation. This isn't about even taking people's guns away. I mean, this is about responsible gun ownership in the United States. And as long as we have these unregulated supplies, there will never be a shortage of people with mental illness. There will never be a shortage of poverty. There will never be a shortage of desperate conditions. There'll never be a shortage of misguided young people to put that supply into. And so while we work on all of those other human conditions, we also need to address irresponsible gun ownership and a supply that is just like out of control. That's what the iron pipeline is. Because these guns, they don't come from our state. They come from other states that have really loose supplies and then smuggling them up in what is known as the iron pipeline. And so, there's a lot of contributing factors, but when we talk about political polarization, one of the big functions of political polarization is to avoid or prevent us from having these kinds of conversations. Because, for example, I'm AOC. I'm a radical leftist, blah, 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 socialist. I'm a bartender on one day, a wealthy conspiracy person another day, just like an avatar, right? And what they do is that they create these avatars so that we don't listen to each other. If you turn everyone into a cartoon and you can just dismiss them at face value, then you never actually have to listen to what another person has to say. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a Trump supporter or a right-wing person aggressively step up to me in person and try sometimes they get a finger in my face or a camera in my face, and they start asking me a question and they're expecting me to act in a certain way. And because of how I've been presented to them in mass media, not just by right-wing media, by the way, by mainstream media, left, right, all of it. And when I don't show up in a conversation with them in this super crazy, radical frame, they're taken really aback. And it actually creates the opportunity for a conversation. Now, I mean, are politics polarized? Yeah. I don't know how we come back from it. I think a lot of it comes down to our two-party system, which I think is pretty untenable for all involved. So long as there are two parties, everyone's going. I think that it frames everything. It even frames our media, because not only are there liberal outlets and conservative outlets, but also media frame everything into a two-sided conflict. And I find that media in other countries don't necessarily boil things down into two camps or just two sides or two perspectives, the way that we do here in the U.S. And I also think that the division is to the benefit, while that division is to the benefit of the wealthy and it's to the benefit of the powerful, at the same time, there are very real issues that are unignorable. And this is a country that is very accepting and tolerant of racism. People can talk about cancel culture all they want, this is a country that tolerates a lot of racism. It defends racism. It defends transphobia. It's okay with a lot of it. And I don't see how anyone can talk about cancel culture being a real thing when, like, these so-called victims of cancel culture are getting $100 million deals and, like, literally have experienced no consequences aside from some people being mad at them. But I assure you, people being mad at you is not so what? You know, people are mad at you. Again, like, you don't have a right to be liked. You just don't. And all these people crying about cancel culture, they have like platforms that totally enrich them. Meanwhile, people who are actually canceled, right? People who are silenced, whether it's through being deliberately ignored by media and press or actively fired for having certain views, like, we never actually talk about that or hear about that because we're not even, those conversations don't even get a platform to happen, you know? So, I mean, a lot of this does contribute to our polarization, but there are real things that we're polarized around. And there's class issues, there's race issues, there's gender issues, identity issues. But again, there's also just, sometimes there's a lack of willingness, even in issues of class, to stand up to those in power. And so that's a whole thing unto itself. Taking a look at some of your